Welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I apologize for being late. I've had a real hard time dialing out. So we're on a cellular signal, which isn't as good as the one I usually use, but that seemed to be what's available right now. So we'll make the best of it, I guess.
Well, the important thing, Greg, is that you're here, and that in a very short time, Benjamin Franklin is also going to be here.
Let's hope so. He usually shows up.
Fantastic. We also have a caller here from Washington. Good evening, Washington.
Hi, this is Wendy. Hi, Rich. Hi, Greg.
Hey, welcome,
Hello,
Wendy. Glad to have you here.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Greg, tell us a little about Ben. When did you first begin receiving contact from Benjamin Franklin?
Well, that first happened, I believe, in 2011. It was in the fall of 2011, and I've been familiar with channeling for a long time. The first time I saw a channel was in, I believe, 1985, and so I was well familiar with the phenomenon, but just around that time, 2010, I decided I really wanted to get serious about my spiritual growth and begin digging into things, meeting more people, finding teachers, and I had connected with Robin Alexis, and one day I asked if she could channel for me, and she agreed to, and when she did, my master guide came through and told me that I would be channeling him as well as Benjamin Franklin. And I'd received contact from Benjamin Franklin kind of telepathically before then, so it wasn't a huge surprise to me. But with that incident, it was solidified for me anyway. And then I began actually sort of a formal training in channeling that lasted about a year, and to get to a point of being clear and proficient with it.
How fascinating, Greg. Prior to beginning the channeling of Ben, did you write down some of the thoughts that Ben gave you whenever he was making telepathic contact with you?
At times I did, and it was, thinking back, it was more along the lines of the phenomenon of channeling and is it possible to channel him and things like that. There wasn't a lot of content, but it was more about the idea of channeling, I guess. But,
fascinating.
Once we began, he said some things that he wanted to do, including writing books, etc. And then I got more background information of what he wanted to accomplish.
Well, fantastic. We look forward to you sharing any and all of that you want to with us. And, of course, we're looking forward to Ben. Whenever he gets ready to come on, Greg, just let us know. Wendy, do you have a question for Greg?
I don't. I'm just enjoying listening and hearing some of the background because I've had the good fortune to hear Greg channel Ben quite a few times, and just the shift in energy is very palpable. I find him very jovial in a lot of ways.
From everything I've read in the past about Benjamin Franklin, he was quite an individual, quite a character.
Yes, indeed. He did have a big sense of humor, and he still does. And he's not. Sometimes he's very serious, and sometimes he's not. So it's interesting to see that come through. So a minute, I'll be ready. Just let me prepare a little bit more here.
Sure, take your time, Greg. Wendy, I'm sure in the past you've done, as I know I have, reading at one time or another on Ben and on the time period back then, which was such a fascinating time period with so many wonderful people. Washington was there, Jefferson was there, and, of course, Franklin was such a key figure in the Revolution and in the founding of our nation.
Yes, that's for sure.
Greetings, one and all. It is my pleasure to join with you upon the air and upon the internet, as it is a great marvel for me to see the technology and the ways you have of communicating in your present time. It has been a pleasure for me to adopt to this, to be able to talk to 10 people at the same time on the telephone, for example, or to speak on the radio to many, many people. It is a long ways from me flying a kite and inducing energy in the string that could be quantified by a spark from the key that has led to the technological marvels that you now have. I have much to say today. It is a mission of mine to enter through this one who's Gregory, who is a very close partner of mine, an associate. We work together in bringing the message out. We have just begun in what we have to do. We have spent time writing on several different books. We have spent time formulating what you would call group phone calls or conference calls of different groups of people for different purposes. My wish is to teach as many as who will learn. I know I have a large amount of fame even in your time, and my intentions are from the highest nature. My intentions always were from the highest nature to teach people by both lessons and by example the way to utilize their lives, to utilize their God-given skills, and to utilize their opportunities of being upon the planet as human beings who are fully conscious and awake and aware, to live their lives as fully as possible and to contribute to the betterment of life upon the planet. These are my principles, my guiding principles, my reasons for coming through and speaking. Do you have questions to interview me with to begin?
We do. I want to start off, Benjamin Franklin, by asking you, what was it like in those times of revolution?
It was a time of great uncertainty. It was always uncertainty. It was not many even considered the colonies to have the potential of being a nation. I was one of the first who had that idea. Early on in my life, I could see the potential. I was given opportunities of my upbringing and of my experiences by those whom I met, by the decisions I made, to put myself in a place of rapid learning and rapid assimilation into the culture of the colonies overall. I had opportunities early on to travel a great deal and to meet many in the areas to the far north and to the far south from my base in Philadelphia. This gave me as you can say, a accurate finger on the pulse of what occurred there, but also gave me a unique opportunity to see what was possible with these separate colonies. So as the time of revolution grew near, the idea for separating was never a 100% popular idea. As you know, there were still many loyalists in the country even during the revolution. But it gradually became apparent to me as my post as an agent of several colonies with Great Britain to the court of the king and to relations with Parliament that eventually it was not possible to remain a colony of Britain, although all wanted to remain associated with her, as that is where all of our relatives were. Most of us came from there. It was still obvious that the momentum had come to a time of tipping, as you call now tipping points, where the necessity for separation and by force if necessary, was imminent. There was no turning back. The times were one of great, you could look back and call it an adventure, but at the time it was great uncertainty, great risk, but at the same time there was a very strong unity among all who had decided to partake of this, who had decided of this undertaking is the word I look for. The Congress at that time were all committed, and was this connection of all that made it indeed possible to weather any storm, to deal with any adversity that was thrown our way.
Mr. Franklin, how would you compare the political climate at that time with that of today?
Well, it is difficult to compare in a complete way, I will say at the beginning, because of your media and the way communications are conducted. But I can say that even in those days when our communications were words printed upon a paper, we could not even print photographs. Obviously, we could print etchings and illustrations. But even though our means of communication and distribution were no more near the internet you have today, we still could get messages out to a great degree to a great amount of people. The content of those messages, many would consider slanderous. When the heat of our campaigns, both for our Congress and for our early presidents, the accusations were even perhaps more scurrilous than yours today. It was a time of great freedom. Most in the United States had come from England, in which an aristocracy controlled everything, and the voting that did take place was for foregone conclusions. This indeed led to great repression of many groups of people, mainly religious repression, such as Puritans and Quakers and other groups, which allowed the idea of sailing to America to begin a new life to be very attractive. Therefore, the wide open opportunity, it did not take long for our campaigns to become quite slanderous, and the candidates would get carried away and begin saying anything about anyone. What I will say was that in the early days, it was very high in the minds of all that even though they may be carried away in the heat of a campaign, that they were all part of something new and part of something very important. This made it not always easy, but imperative that a compromise be reached among those who disagreed. So if different parties are elected, different individuals are elected, they soon found that it was necessary for the success, for the survival of this new country, to act in ways that promoted a resolution to conflicts so this country could be born and be successful. The times now are different in that there is not the thought to be hanging in the balance the future of the country. Most politicians seemed so, as I see them, absorbed in their own stories, in their own purposes, and in serving the masters whom they have chosen to serve, that they cannot have sight of the country of a whole as it exists. With the billions of people, it is very hard to see it as a group of individuals that they serve as a government. They see it as factions, and factions that must be pleased. They do not realize that these factions are actually composed of individuals at the core of it. They allow themselves now to be controlled by factions, to be, whether the factions are commercial, whether they are political, whether they are foreign governments that wish to influence, or whether they are large ideological groups that wish to influence. They see their constituents as these groups, as these factions, rather than as human beings who compose the United States of America. In my view, the country is much more at peril than they realize, because they cannot bring themselves to take a higher view, as they are so involved in the minutia of their own success. So this is my warning at this time, that it is imperative that those who can have this view make it known, that it is time to begin to take into account the needs of all when seeking office, when defining the objectives of a candidate are.
Mr. Franklin, what can be done by these politicians to improve the political climate nowadays?
As I have stated, the acquisition of awareness of themselves, not as politicians, but as those who have been entrusted with the care and the perpetuation of the United States of America. Not the United States of America that they wish to see or have come about, but the United States of America as a whole. It is unknown to me how the existing ones can be brought to this awareness. It is designed in our Constitution that we created with much anguish, with much negotiation, with much arm twisting, as you would say now, to have a country that was flexible. The Constitution was designed to be amended. This led to the longevity of it, and thus the longevity of the nation, as it could change as times changed. It is the knowledge of this, the knowledge that at the root of the power of all politicians is the people who vote. It was intended that individuals, human beings, held the votes. Now, it is construed that corporations are human beings, and that human beings are not nearly as important as the money that can be expended to elect, to influence votes. This was not when we attended. As you know, there was great debate over who could vote. Would it just be men, as it was originally set up? Would it just be landowners? Would it just be free men? As you know, slavery was quite popular at that time, more popular with some than others. Yet those who were in bondage and indentured servitude were not permitted to vote. As times changed, more and more were allowed to vote, to bring into it. But it never did we intend that votes would be, it would be more important, the votes, the influence that comes from commercial entities were more important than those that came from people, because commercial entities are composed of people. Those who have employment may vote the way that is good for their employment, but it was not intended for commercial entities themselves, who are by definition fictitious persons, to become persons with the ability they have to affect the outcome. It is not to be construed. Many have asked before whether I would be a Democrat or a Republican. Those who know me would probably guess I would be what your present-day Democrat is. That is a possibility. More so than I would be a Republican, and that is from my upbringing and my life. That is who I was. I believed in the wisdom of the common man. I believed in the wisdom of the middle class, not the aristocracy, nor those who were impoverished, but of the man who worked, perhaps who was a shopkeeper, who indeed did have a family and had concerns of the community foremost in his mind. So there was a balance between his welfare, the welfare of his family, the welfare of his business, and the welfare of his community as a whole.
Benjamin, you were personally acquainted with many of the other founding fathers, the great, now legendary historical figures of the time. Could you tell us what these men were like? I'd like to start by asking you about Thomas Jefferson. What kind of a man was he?
Thomas Jefferson was a man of great principle. He was many years my junior, and he at many times did seek my counsel. He was one who was at the beginning, a reluctant leader, but he is one who did indeed grow into the position. And as he did, he became quite capable and indeed quite curious of all of the ramifications, shall we say, of leadership, all of the attributes of leadership. And he was very curious of what I knew, of what knowledge and experiences I had gained in my lifetime, from as one who was a printer, one who came from humble beginnings, one who indeed became a commercial success, whereas I could retire at an early age and engage in scientific experiments. He was curious of those as well as my experiences as a representative of the colonies in England for many, many years, as well as the ambassador to France, as well as the one who negotiated the peace, as well as one who was then helping to create the Constitution. He was very curious of all these things. He wanted to seemingly have an instant education at my side of my experiences. So his curiosity was quite flattering to me. And it is not surprising to me that he grew to be the statesman he did.
You also were acquainted with George Washington. Can you tell us what kind of a man he was?
He was a man of great discipline. He was seemingly born for the role which he had. None of us risked as much and sacrificed as much for the revolution than this one did. He was, while a somewhat aloof in personality or in stature, was a man of great wisdom. Many times we thought he was avoiding our conversations, but yet to find that he was deep in thought instead. He had the mind to formulate not only great battle plans, but great political actions that encompassed many people and many views. This was a trait he gained later on when he was president. He was indeed the natural leader of the country as the first president because indeed during the war he was the leader of the country. It was not like he was given the presidency as a reward for his service, but it was more he was the natural leader of the country to that point that brought the country to that place. Mm-hmm. If there indeed had been royalty in the country, he would have been proclaimed king. But of course, that was not to be. Are there others who you are curious of?
Yes, there was one figure who at that time would have been considered somewhat controversial. Tell us about Alexander Hamilton. Tell us about him.
He was one who brought great conflict at times because of his views. He could indeed stir up trouble, as you say, and the lack of cohesiveness of those who could agree with him, the lack of support that could be provided him at times brought his abilities into great question. Although he was a man of great intellectual capability, he was, however, unique in the way he expressed it and in the way that he, from time to time, could seemingly change views and leave those who conversed with him quite puzzled. Still a great man as well.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but during that time of his presidency, Thomas Jefferson pursued and went after the Barbary pirates. I see an analogy there with our own country, our own nation, at the moment dealing with radical Islam, with ISIS. Could you speak to that issue about the current threat that we face against Islamic terrorism?
The current threat is thought by many to be one of imminent danger, imminent harm to all. This is portrayed by the news media. As with the Barbary pirates, indeed the ones who are being affected, who are in imminent danger, are very small. I liken both the behavior of the pirates, the behavior of the terrorists, to children who walk into your house and they take the fine china and they throw it upon the ground and break every piece. They get your attention. They bring great fear of possibilities of danger. But indeed, to the average American, the chance that they would be harmed by them is very, very small. It is infinitesimal. There are incidents that occur in the country where some are killed or are harmed, and then this fear is extrapolated by the media and by politicians to bring to light, to bring to fruition what they desire, which is war. The war is not necessary in terms of protecting individual citizens, but it is quite necessary in terms of protecting politicians and their agendas. It is always easy to arouse fear among constituents, among voters, among populations. It is easy to arrange an effect of repeated and growing fear. Gregory tells me to say domino effect or steamroller effect, that when one becomes afraid, then another becomes afraid, and another becomes afraid. All kings have known, all emperors have known, all lords who have a manor with a few subjects know that fear is a very strong motivator, and it is a very strong uniter. So it is a good formula for a politician who wants to be powerful to instill fear and to do all they can to instill fear. Again, what needs to be seen is, as I have said before, is to have a view of the larger picture of what occurs. Why do those who are given the roles of terrorists, the roles of those who want to destroy every man, woman, and child in the United States of America, who are given that role by the politicians, why do they do that? Why are they terrorists? What brings them to the idea of wanting to do this? They are indeed human beings as well. They are indeed human beings who have fear. What fears do they have that make them want to do this? And what role does this country, the United States of America, have in stoking those fears?
Benjamin, it's very interesting.
About living peacefully.
Yes.
It is. Yes, you have another question or a comment. I am happy to listen.
Fits right into what you were just saying, as a matter of fact, and it's from guest 2 in the chat room. And guest 2 asked, where does Ben see our country heading in the near future?
That is a very good question, where your country is heading, and I will say our country is heading, is where you take it. You have the responsibilities as citizens to seize control, because it is heading now by design to a place with less freedom. Indeed, those who speak the loudest of freedom are those who desire to take it from you. You must awaken to this. This, as I began saying before, these methods that are used of instilling fear and generating enemies to fight against have been used throughout history. One merely needs to open any history book of any time and they can see this occur. So it is up to you to seize control of this. There is a democratic process that exists by you electing representatives, as you all know. There are other processes that indeed are into the Constitution which bypass Congress to allow you to change. By states enacting laws and bringing those together to bear can indeed amend the Constitution as well. This is perhaps one method. But as I see it, what will occur if no awakening of individuals takes place is a gradual decomposition of the quality of life. The cacophony of your political races that now occurs will grow in even greater degree to where no sense will be possible to be made out of anything that your candidates say. At some point, all will collapse. Possibly an economic collapse will occur, or a mass political collapse. There will then be uncharted territory of how to emerge from these. This will require a recomposition of what you would call government. There will be a new emergent political class of those who have become quite disgusted with what occurred, and they will indeed be willing to risk their lives to bring a revolution within this country to restore reason and sanity. It is my hope that the first method that citizens can organize themselves to amend Constitution where it needs to be amended, to bring the votes back to the hands of the people, and to lessen the influence of the untruthful media in spreading untruths to a mass scale and spreading fear to a mass scale. I urge those to resist this.
Benjamin, we have another question from the chat room. Again, from guest 2. And this is a serious, heavy question here. Do you see nuclear war in our future?
There is always a potential for it. Nuclear war does not exist until it is started. But I do not see a large probability for it. There are those who do hold that in their back pocket, as you say. But the presence of it is not looming large at this time.
Do you see the American people rising to the occasion to make the necessary changes should a certain level of chaos occur, such as you alluded to earlier?
Yes, I do see that this will occur. The question is, at which point will it be triggered? The longer those wait, the higher the costs.
This is a critical year in terms of the presidential election, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, there are great precedents that I see just from observing what occurs in real time. And what is being given is attention to those who do indeed defy the political landscape, who defy what you call the ways or the wisdom of their parties and wish to speak on their own. This type of speech will be appreciated. It does begin to open the doors to new ideas. Both of the parties are highly corrupt, and the solutions that they propose are indeed defective solutions that serve the parties. This indeed is being questioned and will be questioned on a larger scale. So, coming to a place of possibilities, this opens this up.
In a certain sense, America is very definitely in a pre-revolutionary mood, aren't we?
In some degrees, yes. The amount of anger is very similar. Rather than the anger being directed at the king and parliament, it is being directed at each other. This is dangerous. I'm sure you can see the difference.
Absolutely. Mr. Franklin, we have another question from the chat room, again from guest 2. What was it like in France when you were there for years in the court of Louis XVI? Decadent?
Yes, you could characterize it as such. Yet, there was great humanity within that. The possibilities that France would support this new group of colonies who wish to become independent of their sworn enemy was obvious. yet it was also a very expensive proposition to them. It was a very difficult decision or a difficult project, shall I say, to coerce this assistance. But behind the decision was a deep belief that the French have in the dignity of man and the dignity of humanity. And indeed, with all the reasons speculated as to why this assistance was given, this, I believe, was the turning factor. So it was with great sorrow that I observed the revolution there. Afterwards, it was understandable due to the personalities of those involved in the court and in the aristocracy. But still, I held and still do deep regards for the human compassion of those.
Yes, too, as an interesting comment and question, Mr. Franklin. They say you had 1 year of schooling, and I guess by that they're referring to formal education. You might be able to elaborate a little on that. Do you consider yourself a genius, they ask?
Oh, it is hard to consider oneself a genius. However, I was blessed with the upbringing to pursue what I needed to pursue. I was in a very large family, one of the youngest. What I could acquire was what I could arrange to be acquired. The schooling I had was minimal. I would have expected much more, but it was not to be possible for me. However, my ability to educate myself was what saved me. As many know, I was apprenticed to my oldest brother as a printer. We were such a large family as that could occur. This brought me into the world of books, and within books were knowledge, and within the world of books were others who were in the world of books, who appreciated knowledge. And these were some of my earliest experiences. And the curiosity I had, along with what you can say the other proclivities I was blessed with, of being able to rapidly consume books, to rapidly assimilate ideas, led one to another, not only in the acquisition of knowledge, but in the acquisition of relationships with others who were interested in knowledge. This was a reason why I founded the library as I did, as this knowledge is much, much too important to be kept in private libraries under lock and key. It indeed does need to be available to all, because indeed knowledge and education is the key. I was lucky in that I could educate myself. I had the situations and the means to establish that habit in myself early on. And this paid greatly, again, in my activities of an intellectual and philosophical nature, my inventions, etc. So I was blessed with this curiosity. I was blessed with intelligence and intellect, and I was as well blessed with the means to pursue what I needed to pursue and to share what I learned with others.
Benjamin, I'd like to turn for a moment to our callers. Central Illinois, did you have a question for Mr. Franklin?
Yes. In my reading of some of the earlier life of yourself, I read that you published one of the first political cartoons. In the illustration that I saw, I couldn't really make it out. Do you know what it was? Can you remember?
For these details, I have to travel to that place and time. Give me a moment.
I thought that was real fascinating that, you were, if not the first, you were one of the first to publish a political cartoon.
the cartoons did have to do with the activities of certain religious figures at that time who could command large constituencies. And this indeed was quite humorous to me. I learned early on that indeed it was possible to gain attention by, shall you say now, poking fun at those who seemingly were in charge. I did indeed calculate my public first to know that if I did publish a cartoon or something humorous that would come to the borderline of gentle ridicule, that would be received well by others, whereby I could keep my skin on my body, so to speak. But that was one vehicle that did allow. It was difficult to print cartoons. It was much easier to print the written word with typesetting, etc., but at times, yes.
In a certain sense, you might be considered the father of American political satire as well.
Yes, well, it is something that needed to be done.
Wendy in Washington, do you have a question for Ben?
I don't at this time.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Franklin, I'm going to turn the floor back to you.
Well, I will begin to summarize in that the idea of one from the past coming to the present and speaking is quite unique, perhaps. Not everyone understands this concept of channeling. Many will not believe this is true, and that is fine. It is not my wish, it is not my endeavor to convince anyone of the phenomenon through which they hear me. The reason I am engaging in this, the reason my friend Greg partners with me, is to bring out the message of motivation to those who exist in the country at this time to indeed take upon themselves the responsibility for the continuation of the country, to read the Constitution, be familiar with what it actually says, because there are many out there who are proclaiming to know what it says, to get to know the highest expressions of those around them, of their neighbors, of their friends, and even of their enemies, to find a way to regard all in the country as fellow Americans rather than as those who have different ideas, and to realize that what is most important is the survival of the country. And with this is a responsibility to indeed educate themselves as to what they need to know to make decisions that they are comfortable with. Do not just listen to one source of news or one source of opinion, but to have the courage to reach out to those of an opposite opinion, of an opposite view, and rather than look for ways to discredit that, to look for truth in there as well. In my background and experiences as a diplomat, I found that there are many, many different versions of truth. Those same truths often sounded very different. They sounded like the opposite expressions or opinions. But indeed, within all that opposition, all that contrariness, as you can say, were indeed the same desires. And if those who find themselves polarized can find a way to realize that they are more like their opponents than they are different, then there is a possibility for progress to be made, for this country to thrive once again.
Benjamin Franklin, I want to thank you. Thank you for being our guest tonight. Do you have a final thought you would like to give all Americans, a closing thought?
to allow your minds to be as open as your mouths are. With that, I will leave you. I am Benjamin Franklin. Good day, my friends.
Thank you for being here.
Whew. That was a good one.
And Greg, thank you for bringing Ben to us tonight.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. Is an hour over?
We've got 5 minutes left. If anyone would like to make any comments, go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, that's fine. Anyone has anything to say or questions or comments, that's fine.
I was just kind of curious. What do you think Ben would think of our candidates now? I'm watching some of the caucus and the ones that are winning now, and on both sides, to me, it's kind of sad that this is the best that we can do.
Yes, it is. He's always said that, you know, the brightest minds are not drawn to politics, with his own exception, of course. But it is those who have a combination of being able to have ideas, congeal ideas, bring ideas together and people together, and to also have a bit of combativeness to them. So a politician is an interesting individual, not necessarily the most qualified leader, but that seems to be what happens in our country. So he sees that sometimes they have good intents, and sometimes they don't have good intents. He says, but most times this year, they are all quite entertaining.
Yes, I've watched all of the debates, and it has been very entertaining, that's for sure.
Yeah. You know, he's always said it's up to individuals. And the books that we're working on, we started 2 books. One was entitled "For Those Who Wish to Serve," and it's a book for those who wish to serve, politicians or government officials. And the other is for those who wish to be citizens, and it is a guide for citizens. And sadly, you know, I just haven't had the time to fully devote to completing them, but hopefully this will happen soon and we can get these out there. He has just very good ideas, very detailed instructions for both. And it's very interesting and these were books that he wanted to write later in his life but never had time to.
Greg, if you have a website that you'd like to share with us, that would be great also.
What I have now is a kind of a general website. It is WordPress.com/channel in Seattle.
Terrific.
And people
Greg,
can sign up there, sign up with their email, and I send things out occasionally if they want to keep up with what Benjamin Franklin's doing.
Fantastic. And once again, Greg, I want to thank you and Benjamin Franklin for being here tonight. Wendy, thank you for calling in. And to all of our listeners, I want to wish everyone a fantastic evening. Good night.
Thank you for this opportunity, Rich. Good night.
You're welcome. Good night.